All right. On behalf of the town of Yountville, welcome to our community workshop on the Envision Yountville general plan update process. I know by looking through the crowd that some of you have been with us through the 18-month journey that we've had to get to this point. And I do think it's important that we understand that and I'm going to use the words proposed draft, and I'm going to ask everybody to repeat that, proposed draft. What you're seeing today is a draft document, and it is the beginning point for the conversation that has been occurring in the Yountville community for 18 months through a series of speaker workshops, community engagement, and a 12-month process with the town advisory group. And we have a little highlight of the town advisory group. Several of them are here, and they have helped foster community discussions and ideas to serve as a launching point for where we are today. So the document that you're seeing, the document we're going to give you a tour of, is a draft. And I'm going to repeat that again, a proposed draft. And it's important because, and again, I'm looking out and seeing, and I'm talking to folks that have been following this, there's some ideas in there that some of you may really like. There's some ideas in there that some of you are, maybe that's all right. And there might be some that you really don't care for. But I think it's important that we recognize that as a community, all of these ideas have come from your friends and neighbors in the community conversations. Yountville's a diverse community, and from a staff standpoint, we'll tell you, many of you aren't afraid of sharing your thoughts and ideas. So when we look at building and developing a community document, we're not always going to be on the same page. But I think it's important to be respectful and look at what do we need to do. Because the other thing when we look at a general plan is a guidance. And one thing I always have to remind people is a general plan is like a cookbook. It allows you to get someplace, but it does not guarantee. When you look at zoning, so there's an idea, that doesn't mean that it's going to get built. It simply facilitates the potential, if that's an end outcome. So I want everybody to remember that, even if you see an idea in there. I mean, think about it. Our last general plan was in 1992. Okay, 25 going on, 26 years now. I'm going to say a lot of elements in that general plan have come to fruition. Some did, some came out differently. So we need to realize that it's really a guidance document for us as we move forward for probably closer to 20 years. And we also have state and regulatory federal requirements that we need to come in. So it's a collection opportunity. So today I want to acknowledge the town staff, our consultant team that have been working on this, but I want to introduce first our town council, because what's also important to recognize right now is we are now beginning with this draft structure. This document is now in the council's purview for action. Before, it was in the community's purview to develop. So the proposed draft now begins its process of going to the council. So we have all of the council here. They're going to be observing, listening, watching your comments. We have a series of public workshops. The draft proposed general plan will be going to all of our citizen advisory commissions, and then it will be coming to the town council on December 4th for additional community input. So Mayor John Dunbar, Vice Mayor Marita Dornbecker, Council Member Margie Moeller, Council Member Jeff Durham, Council Member Carrie Dorman. So I will tell you, they're excited to hear your feedback. And I will also say, I think some of them are also excited to see the process move forward and look forward to some closure, because for some of us, after we go in a 2-year process, right? I can see some heads nodding. That's a good point, thank you. I'm sorry, my name's Steve Rogers and I'm the town manager. And for some of you that don't know, I also happen to be a town resident. So it is something. But I would like to acknowledge the dedicated hard work of our planning staff, led by Sandra Liston, Nathan Steele, Curtis Sawyer, and our consultant, Christine O'Rourke. We're excited to be at this stage with our team, and I'm going to turn it over to them.
I am up first. Hi, everyone. It's great to have you here today. We're really excited to unveil our draft general plan and get your feedback. So on the agenda today, I know a lot of you have been to these workshops before, so I'll try to be pretty brief, but I wanted to give you a little refresher course. And first of all, we're going to talk a little bit about what is a general plan, and we'll kind of review what we've done and how we've created this draft general plan, how we've gotten to this point. We'll talk about how the general plan responds to the community's needs and desires. And we'll talk a little bit, that's when I'm going to hand it over to Sandra. She's going to talk about potential change areas where we've had a lot of discussions with the community about where there is infill or opportunities to do some new development. So we'll talk about that. And then next steps. Part of the next steps will be the instructions for what we're asking for you to do here today to give us your feedback on these draft policies and programs that we've kind of highlighted. Okay. All right, so what is a general plan? General plan is going to be eventually, it will be adopted by the council, and the general plan's lifespan is about 20 years. If a community is young and it's growing very quickly, sometimes the general plans will be updated more often than that, like every 10 years. That was certainly the case for Yountville when the town started out. But now Yountville's pretty well built out, so we're got a horizon of about 20 years for this plan. That's important because we want to make sure that our policies are flexible enough so that they can kind of last those 20 years. Of course, the general plan can be amended, but we're looking for a real living document. Often, we say that the general plan is a blueprint for future growth. It sets the priorities for how the town is going to develop, what the infrastructure is going to be, and the plan itself, the town council and the boards and commissions of the town, as well as the town staff, take that document, and whenever they're looking at any kind of new development proposal, new town infrastructure, any new programs, they're going to look at the general plan and see if it's consistent with the goals and policies of the general plan. The programs in the general plan itself kind of acts as a work plan for the town staff, and sets priorities for the town. So the general plan really is about managing change to benefit the community. We know things are going to change. They always do, whether we like it or not. So ideally, what we're going to do is anticipate that change and then choose our path forward. And we're reminded by a famous quote from Charles Darwin, "It's not the strongest of the species that survive, nor the most intelligent, but the one most responsive to change." Of course, as we've been going through this process, we're also reminded of the quote of Woodrow Wilson, "If you want to make enemies, try to change something." So who are we planning for? Well, of course, we're planning for the residents, and that really is a priority that comes through in the plan. Most of you here, I assume, are residents. But we also need to kind of look at this through another lens, because it's not just the residents, it's not just the full-time residents. We want to plan for the part-time residents as well. We want to plan for our visitors, for our businesses, for future residents, including our children and other people who may be moving into the town, as well as other species. We want to preserve habitat for our plants and our animals, and especially for endangered and threatened species, make sure that there's appropriate protections for them. What are we planning for? These are kind of some of the major themes in the general plan that we've picked out. And I'm going to go in a little bit more in depth in this. But first of all, we want to preserve the quality of life here. That we heard that loud and clear from the residents. They're very happy with the quality of life. We want to maintain it going forward. We also want to maintain community character. Yountville is a beautiful, charming, small town. You have such wonderful natural environment here, a strong, proud tradition of agriculture. We want to preserve those things about the community. We need to ensure economic sustainability. One of the things that the general plan has to do is it has to respond to regional and state issues. So we're looking at reducing traffic congestion, maintaining and improving air quality, making sure that there's enough affordable housing for everyone. And then finally, we also need to prepare for environmental hazards like earthquakes, wildfire, flooding, and be sure we're responding to a changing climate. We know that the climate is already warming. We are looking at more frequent storms, more intense storms as well, droughts and heat events. So we need to plan for all of that. Our goals for the update, we kind of talked about this. I remember talking about this at the first meeting. So now is a good time to kind of check in and see if we've actually met the goals when you're reviewing the draft plan. First and foremost, we wanted to create a plan that expresses the value and the vision of the community. When you're looking through the plan, you'll see there are actually two vision statements. There's one in the beginning of the plan, which is a very beautiful descriptive passage about Yountville and kind of preserving the best parts about Yountville going into the future. And then there's another one in the plan too, which is a little bit more, a little more simple and direct. But besides the vision statements, there are also the goals that are all throughout the plan, and those are really articulating the values and the vision of the community. We wanted to be sure to address potential housing infill and change areas. There's only a few of them, but we'll talk a little bit more about that. We need to update the goals, policies, and programs. We did start with the 1992 plan. We did a very thorough evaluation of that, looked to see what we wanted to keep, what was no longer relevant or had already been implemented, and then of course we added a lot of new policies and programs as well. And then finally, we wanted to create a concise, easy to read, and attractive document, and I hope that you agree that that is at least what this draft looks like. We were hoping for something that you would be proud to put on your cocktail table, but hopefully it's at least attractive and easy to read enough so that you will be inspired to read all the way through it. How do we create the general plan? Well, we started off almost 2 years ago in the beginning, the first half of 2017, we had 5 speaker series, and that was on a variety of topics. There was one on agricultural preservation, on economic sustainability, on community character. So that took about 6 months. That was pretty much the first third of our planning process. And then in June of 2017, the council appointed an 11-member town advisory group, or what we call the TAG. And that TAG met for 10 times over a little more than a year. And we looked at all kinds of documents. There was a very nice workbook that had been produced that gave a lot of information to the TAG. There was an existing conditions report that our environmental planner and environmental consultant had produced. So we looked at all of that information. We went through the existing plan, and we very methodically addressed all of the different elements of a general plan and spent a lot of time on land use issues as well. The TAG helped us to host 3 community workshops. The first one was more general. The second 2 were, again, very intense, looking at different land use areas. We also did a presentation at the Veterans Home because we wanted to be sure to include our veterans. And then kind of after that, as we were getting closer, we met with the boards and commissions of the town. We also met with the council. We had 2 study sessions with the council because we wanted to check in with them as we were developing the policies and programs and make sure that we were on the right track. We asked them if we've missed anything. So we kept kind of molding this general plan as we went along, and we've taken all of that information to now produce the draft general plan. The final draft, at least the text, did go to the town advisory group, and they approved the text. So that's kind of the first, I guess those are the first 2/3 of our process, and now we're going to be moving into the next third, which is when we look at our draft general plan, and we hear more feedback from you, and we have plenty of time to continue to make changes. We'll be doing environmental impact report at the same time. So Briefly, there are these 7 requirements by the state. A general plan has to have what they call elements or topic areas, and these are all in our general plan. Most of them kind of are standalone chapters. Land use, housing, which is its own animal. The housing element has to be updated every 8 years, and it goes through a very significant process. Your housing element was adopted in 2015, and it will need to be completely rewritten by 2023. So we didn't really want to make many changes to housing. There's circulation, which we're calling mobility. We've combined open space and conservation in one chapter, and then there's safety and noise. We also included some optional elements, which we are permitted to do by state law, and we wanted to kind of pick out some additional chapters that were really important to both the community and help to kind of identify and define and express the character of Yountville. So we have a chapter on our history, one on community and quality of life, and then another on economic sustainability. And then finally, because we recognize how important it is to maintain sustainability, and here when I'm talking about sustainability, it's really about reducing greenhouse gas emissions and having a sustainable lifestyle. So we've picked that out as a theme, and what we've done is we've taken this little leaf icon, and you'll see as you go through the plan, whenever there's a policy or program that's really related to our sustainability theme, we've identified that by the leaf icon. So how does the general plan respond to community needs and desires? So first of all, it preserves quality of life. And now I'm just going to kind of give you some some highlights of the general plan. There's a lot more in the general plan than just this, of course. This was very important to the TAG, and so we wanted to prioritize residents' needs in governmental decision-making and delivery of services. So that means whenever the town is looking at a new program or a new development, new infrastructure, they're going to prioritize the residents' needs first. Maintain good neighbor practices. This is not just between neighbors in a residential neighborhood, but especially between the commercial area and the residential area, where sometimes there's a little conflict. So issues like parking, litter, noise, privacy come up. So the general plan addresses these. It talks about setting standards, adopting or updating ordinances where it's necessary, and also enforcing the code to make sure that these problems are not only addressed, but that they're reported back to the town. Continuing to restrict short-term rentals, short-term meaning less than 30 days. Short-term rentals are, of course, prohibited in the residential neighborhoods, but may be permitted in the commercial areas. The plan continues to restrict those short-term rentals and also continues to require property owners to register if they're going to rent their property. It promotes arts and culture, including the very popular Art Walk, maintains and expands parks and pathways, including the gaps in the Hopper Creek pathway, and then finally continues to provide recreational and cultural programs and events like bocce and pickleball and all of those things that makes Yountville a really special, wonderful place to live. The plan maintains community character. It preserves historic buildings and resources, not only the properties that are already on the National Register of Historic Places and that are California historic landmarks, but also just historic buildings. And so we're going to be asking your feedback about some programs to identify what those resources are further and to offer some kind of protections and give some standards about how to modify historic buildings in the future. This is really important. We require new development to be of a scale and intensity and design that integrates with the neighborhood, with the town as a whole, and with the natural surroundings. The plan requires all new development to contribute to walkability and an active streetscape. So what that means is to have buildings that are oriented toward the street, to have sidewalks in front of those buildings, to have gathering spaces, courtyards, things that make people want to sit down and talk to other people and walk along the street. And then finally, The plan encourages a mix of uses on Washington Street. In particular, we want to try to get more uses in addition to, we've got a lot of hotels and wine tasting rooms and restaurants, and try to encourage more, a variety, a diversity of businesses, and continue to require residential scaled buildings on the east side of the street so that we have a nice transition from the more commercial, the more developed side of the west side of Washington Street as we move over to the residential neighborhoods. Again, requiring new development to integrate into the natural landscape, to have landscaped buffers. We want to protect existing and new view corridors. And we maintain the rural street design, the historic character of Old Town. And then finally, there are policies to not annex any prime farmland. It preserves the agricultural preserve in the county, and also requires that anything that is currently zoned for agricultural use stays in agricultural use. So that doesn't, there are a couple of parcels that are in agricultural use but are currently zoned for commercial or in residential use. So we're maintaining all of those existing zonings. We have not changed zoning or proposing to change any zoning on agricultural zoned land. The plan ensures economic sustainability, so it's supporting businesses, and particularly ones that enhance the town's reputation and preserves the livability of the town for the residents, very important. The plan encourages visitors and employees to use sustainable modes of travel, to take transit, to drive electric vehicles, for example, to bike and take the Vine Trail to work here, to reduce vehicle trips. And the plan also encourages workforce housing so that our local employees can live here, live near town. And this is really important because we're actually seeing towns like in San Francisco, businesses are closing up just because they can't get employees anymore to work in those businesses. So this is really important to encourage workforce housing. The plan responds to regional and state issues. So one of the things that we're doing is we're maintaining the housing sites that had been identified in the previous housing element. But we also have a special emphasis, if you read the housing chapter, there's a special emphasis on encouraging workforce and senior housing at the veterans' home. That's something that we had talked about in one of the land use workshops. Working with the veterans' home to kind of improve circulation. There were issues about getting the pathway in the veterans' home to where the town limits to have that improved. So the town wants to work with the veterans' home to make that happen. Working with the Napa Valley Transportation Authority to improve transit in the bicycle pedestrian network, including the Vine Trail. And then finally, we want to make sure we're going to require all new development to conform to the state and federal regulations. And as you can imagine, there are a lot of them. There are building codes, there's air quality requirements, there's stormwater requirements, etc. Finally, the plan is preparing for environmental hazards and a changing climate. When you look through the plan, you're going to see lots of maps, and a lot of those maps are showing where the earthquake faults are, where earthquakes have happened before, what the floodplain is, where the wildfire risk is. You can actually look at these maps and kind of figure out where your own home is and how close you are to these zones. And we have those maps because when the staff is looking at new development, they can very quickly, easily see if those are of particular concerns to development in that area. So we're also, and then there's a lot of standards, a lot of requirements that sometimes are put on top of development that are in those zones that they have to conform to, like if you're in a floodplain, for example. There are a few unreinforced masonry buildings still in town, so the plan is encouraging earthquake retrofits, particularly of those unreinforced masonry buildings, maintains the drainage system to reduce the risk of flooding. One of the things that the plan has is a program to consider extending the flood wall to protect that the church-owned property. Let me see if I can do it. It's right here. So that area is in a floodplain, and it's been on the list as a housing element site for a long time, and because it's in a floodplain, it really needs a flood wall in order to make development viable there. Plan promotes fire-safe practices, defensible spaces like clearing vegetation around buildings and roadways, and then finally prepares for increased incidences of drought, storms, and extreme heat days that are likely to happen from climate change. And finally, reduce greenhouse gas emissions. Okay, so now I'm going to turn it over to Sandra, and she's going to walk you through some of the 4 potential change areas. You want me to do it? Yeah, thanks.
So as part of the general plan process that we've been in for the last 2 years, we've explored change areas, and those are change areas to land use. And we really press the community to consider what type of changes are appropriate for Yountville over the term of the general plan, which is that 20-year term. And so some of the changes anticipate a more quick turnaround or change to development standards and zoning, and others looking out further into the future, more conceptually as to things that may be appropriate for the town. So we explored these questions first at the community workshops, of which we had 3, and then these ideas were further explored at the town advisory group meetings and before the boards and commissions and the town council. And while we explored many different ideas, 4 changes are proposed in the general plan that we are sharing with you today. And the first one of those is for the west side of Washington Street, and that's on the west side of Washington between California Drive on the south and Humboldt Street on the north. And the question we ask is whether there's an opportunity to develop the large surface level parking lots that really define that property. And we're talking about the Vintage Estates and really primarily the V Marketplace property. And what we heard from residents is that they would like to see new development blend with the character and scale of existing development. And that's important for Yountville because what we heard from residents is they love what is unique about this area and how it's different from the other communities in this valley. The community didn't want to see infill in parking lots that was to back of the sidewalk and a vertical building like you would find up in St. Helena. So building would have to fit with the character and scale, and in Yountville that means setbacks from the street. There's an emphasis on courtyards and gathering spaces and articulation in buildings. We heard that the community wants to preserve view corridors, and the existing general plan carries forth all of the existing view corridors from the 1992 general plan, and it includes some new ones, one of which we see here, and it's to the south of the marketplace to preserve that driveway extension and views of the hills. So development would need to respect that quality. The residents want development in the area to contribute to walkability and the sociability of the town, so those courtyards and gathering spaces. And then any new development would continue to provide adequate parking, and that means providing the parking that is lost due to the development as well as parking for all of the new uses. And that can be a challenge, but there are design techniques that can be implemented and ways for parking to be addressed. When we were looking at this question, we were asking what types of uses would be appropriate for the development of this area and these parking lots, and the community wanted to see something, some of the uses that were underrepresented. And we already offer a floor area bonus, and that's really in terms of density for professional office and mixed residential, so that's residential over commercial. And as part of this process, the community's open to expanding that to non-wine and non-retail uses. So this is something that the community could benefit from. We really heard strongly that the design techniques should address massing and form, and so we wanted to see an articulation of building facades, the use of varied roof lines, upper floors that are partial floors or set back, in order to have something that is of that scale and character that everyone in Yountville loves. And we've added a new provision, and this is rather significant because we currently have a height limit of 2 stories in town, and it would allow limited 3 stories on this side of the this side of the street. provided that the uses and the project have some level of community benefit. And here we're looking at things like affordable housing, more professional office and service uses, and retail that's not wine or food related. So it's a way to encourage and incentivize uses that we don't find in town, and that's provided that the building is able to be designed in a way to address massing. The next change area, or change area number 2, are the 2 vacant parcels on Humboldt Street at Jefferson. And the community, and this question was raised at the request of the property owner to look at this property because of its proximity to Washington Street at that corner. And so there is a program in the general plan to rezone these 2 vacant lots from Old Town Historic, which is a residential district, to residential scaled commercial, which is a commercial district. And some restrictions or requirements would apply to the redevelopment. One, that the 2 lots would be combined into a single lot to support one development rather than 2 smaller ones. That the development include 2 residential units on the 2nd story to replace the housing opportunity that is lost from the rezone. And then to prohibit alcohol-related and restaurant uses, and that's both in terms of the intensity of the use and people gather and make noise, but also in terms of hours and the impacts on the adjoining residential to minimize those impacts. And based on these conceptual drawings that we worked with an illustrator on, we oriented the building toward the corner of Jefferson and Humboldt so that it faces the commercial district with the parking lot and walls in the rear to protect the adjoining residential neighborhood. And the idea we get from this illustration is that orientation toward the corner and the different building elements, it's probably a little off as to scale, but it is simply that, an illustration or a concept. There's no development proposed as part of the project, but it would be rezoned as part of this general plan update. And of course, the scale and design of the project would be reviewed if a project is proposed following adoption of the general plan if this program and policy is included. So now we're moving on to the 3rd change area. And I want to mention first that change areas 1 and 2 are to rezone those areas now and to change those development standards now. For change areas 3 and 4, it's more to consider a change in the future. Should conditions change? Should a property owner be interested in doing something there? Or if the council or the community showed a stronger interest in doing so. These are identified as change areas because there is a level of interest in the community. However, we didn't receive the same level of consensus support as we did for the first 2. So this is to consider rezoning the 6 remaining residential parcels on North Washington Street between Padrone on the north end and Creek Street on the south. And they're shown in purple there in plan view, and they represent the last 6 residential parcels. And at one point, there were residential parcels from Madison on the north end to Edward James Courtyard on the south end. And over time, those have all been rezoned to either residential scaled commercial, retained commercial, or Old Town commercial. And so this is the last question for the community, whether these 6 parcels would be appropriate. We discussed and explored ideas for live-work opportunities, office uses, service uses, and non-wine retail uses in those areas, in addition to the existing retail. And we discussed whether uses could be allowed within the existing structures. It might be a live-work situation, like an attorney offering an office out of a part of the building and living in the other part, similar maybe to downtown Sonoma or Napa, where the old buildings in the downtown have converted to uses, and they utilize the structure. It anticipates the type of use that is low intensity as to parking, and these parcels could accommodate it, but it also envisions a potential redevelopment as long as the property were to maintain town character. So this is something that's in the plan as a potential opportunity for the future. This is the last opportunity potentially for the future at Vista Condominiums, and the question was whether to add a 2nd story to these existing condominiums. And we are talking about enlarging an existing unit rather than adding a residential unit on the top. And the discussion came out of the desire to have more housing options here in town and to allow residents to add on and to grow their families and hopefully stay in town instead of moving to larger homes in Napa if you were to have a family. So again, this speaks to one of the new proposed programs and policies as to massing, one that I mentioned for the V Marketplace property. And it's really that development should be of a scale and intensity that it is integrated into a neighborhood, it respects that neighborhood and the surrounding environment, and that massing techniques help break the building up. So those are the 4 change areas that you see in the general plan. And as I mentioned, we explored a lot of other ones, and I'm going to share one of those with you now. It was for the north agricultural parcel, and that's the 33-acre parcel that's north of Yountville Crossroad. And we explored with the community whether there was an opportunity to rezone this to a commercial land use, to have it as an option in the future to meet the town's housing needs under state law and affordable housing. What we heard from the community is that this parcel should remain as agriculture now and for the long term of the general plan, and that there's no need to do a rezone when we have other developable options for housing. And so this parcel in its agricultural zoning could remain as vineyards like we see it, or it could develop as a winery to support the grapes on that property. But it's not earmarked for housing development. And what we heard from the community was that housing is appropriate at that vineyard parcel at the south end of town that's already zoned for residential. It's zoned mixed residential, and that represents an opportunity. We explored options at the Veterans Home for workforce and senior housing because they have a facilities master plan to partner with a developer to provide this type of housing. They are the town's largest employer. They have the most available land, and it really represented an opportunity that we would like to acknowledge and partner with in the future. And then this idea for mixed uses in the downtown, for residential over commercial, and maybe in terms of a third story of meeting the town's affordable housing needs in order to maintain the open space and vineyard parcels. So this parcel will remain as ag. And so we heard from Christine what some of the major themes of the general plan are. We've just learned what the 4 change areas are, and all of these items are incorporated into the general plan by content. The introduction lays the framework for this process, where we were going, what we were trying to achieve, and then we break it up into the different themes. The first one being a vibrant environment, and this is a new section of the general plan. And these are all areas that were deemed important to the community, and so we see a chapter on our history. And the goal of this chapter is to identify, preserve, and protect historic resources, and we do that through certain programs for historic resources inventory and to potentially adopt a preservation ordinance, but it's the first time we've addressed historic buildings in the general plan. The next one, community and quality of life, is one we've heard from the residents, how important it is to have this balance between the thriving economy and the residents here in town, and that residents want to have their concerns be heard, and that the quality of life and the natural environment and the arts and culture scene contribute to that. And the third one here, economic sustainability, really looks to maintaining a vibrant and diverse economy, and it acknowledges the tourist economy, but identifies some of the constraints and some of the things that should be addressed over the course of the general plan. The built environment includes land use, which is really one of the most important chapters of the general plan because it addresses growth and development, and really all the other chapters speak to that. And in land use, we identified those 4 change areas, but otherwise, there's very little change in the land use chapter, and its goal is to manage growth while preserving what is unique about this community and to make sure that residential development fits within the context of the neighborhood and respects it, and that Washington Street be developed as the main commercial corridor, and that it too respect its surroundings and maintain view corridors and preserve and provide gathering spaces and courtyards, and this concept of walkability, and then having some being aware of the proximity of uses in town and how they can be appropriate next to one another or not. The housing element we're not changing, and as we heard, it's current until 2023, so there are no substantive changes being made there. Mobility is the transportation network, and it's looking to provide a well-planned transportation network that is safe and efficient, that provides different modes of travel, whether you're a pedestrian, a bicycle, in a car, or in transit, and it addresses all those issues. The natural environment, we are combining open space and conservation, and it looks to preserve open space areas and natural resources now and in the future. And it's looking at parks and recreational facilities and open space and the creek. It's looking at water resources and air quality and speaks to those issues. And the last chapter, or last two chapters, are under a safe environment, and safety speaks to maintaining a safe public environment with public responders, and then responding to emergencies like fire and floods and earthquakes, etc. And the noise chapter is about maintaining Yountville as a quiet community. So that's where we go into different programs, policies, and goals. So this is the update for the proposed general plan, and right here today we're at the community open house and we're seeking feedback. Following today's meeting, we'll be providing an online survey that we hope everyone here will respond to, and we'll get the word out to the rest of the community. And we'd like to keep that open through the review of the draft general plan, which is really into December. And while we're reviewing the draft general plan, we're also drafting the environmental impact report so that they go side by side. And then we'll be taking the draft general plan to the boards and councils for review. And on November 5th, it will go to the Arts Commission. November 13th, it'll go to the Zoning and Design Review Board. And on the 15th, to the Parks and Rec Advisory Committee. And on December 4th, it'll go to council. And so from this period, from now until December 4th, we're seeking comments on this first public draft of the general plan. And we'll be documenting and cataloging all of the comments that we receive, and these will lead to some level of modification in the final plan that will come back before the ZDRB and the council for adoption, what we believe will be March of 2019, but these dates that you see in 2019 may be subject to being bumped out a little bit, although we hope to stay on track. All right, so we want to hear from you, and the draft general plan is online at envisionyountville.com. You can view it. We also have copies around the room that you can look at today, and we're giving out copies of thumb drives that have the general plan on it, so I hope you'll take one of those with you. The online survey will be available shortly, and we ask that you attend the board and commission meetings and send in written comments. What we're trying to do is get all comments to move forward. So now we're going to talk about today's open house. And again, the goal of today is that we want to hear from you. We have 5 stations in the room. One back here on open space and conservation, land use at the back of the room, mobility on this side, it's safety hazards and noise in this corner, and then our new chapters on our history, quality of life, and economic sustainability. And at each of these stations, we will have a staff member and one of the consultant team, and we'll be there to answer questions and get your feedback. And we'll be having interactive activities at those where we're gauging input, where we want to get input on some specific programs and policies that we've pulled out of the general plan. The general plan is a 200-page document, so we don't have them all up. We've pulled what we think is most important, and we'd like to get your feedback on those. We'll be handing out stickers so that you can indicate support with a green sticker or opposition with a red sticker. We'll also have sticky notes so that you could provide a little more detail on your thoughts on one. Let's go to the next slide. This is an example of putting those in, and one of these is a sticky note that speaks to historic resources should maintain historic colors. So something like that would be what we're looking at, and we'll get your feedback on that. So we have the ones that we've identified, and we've got the dots and the sticky notes, but we also have comment cards. So if there's something here that you want to comment on that you don't have a chance on these boards, please fill out comment cards. You can address anything that's on your mind. It may be something that's in the general plan. It may be something that we've missed in the general plan. So it's a great opportunity to let us know, did we get it right or did we not? And I think we're ready to break up now into the next segment of the day, and that's at each of these stations, and we'll get your feedback and we'll answer your questions. And Steve Rogers would like to wrap it up with one comment.
Well, one, I just wanted to say, one, we do really appreciate everybody being here, but mine was more of a procedural thing, so that those of you that wanted to wander through the various stations, you don't need to stay all the way through 4. So I just want to let you know that if you've provided your feedback and everything, then you're comfortable to go. Well, and actually there's going to be additional. So the first thing, all of your sticky notes and all of your comments, as well as the tabulation of the dots, we will be keeping a very public document of all of the comments and things, and you will see it in future. We also have, and we'll be doing, in the next several weeks, we will launch an online survey. So there's additional opportunities for people to provide comment. So there will be a cataloging of all of the comments so that everybody can see that, which actually coincides with my earlier comments when we started, which is we have a diverse community, and there may be some people that really like something and your neighbor might not. So it's a way to make sure that we can show the balance. But yes, those will all be considered, and those will also be available for the public, but also for the council as they move forward the process when they start their deliberations in December. So with that, we'll let everybody get to their assignments, and then, you know, there are about 60 of you here, and we're very appreciative, so I would encourage you all not all to go to the same station at the same time, but kind of work your way around. And for those of you that haven't had refreshments, please have refreshments. Please, Mill, ask questions and thoughts as you would, and enjoy the rest of your afternoon.